Okay, I'm very happy to start.
Hello, Aspies, and welcome to another edition of Inside the Asperger Studios. Today I'm joined with Geoff Lamb, all the way from jolly old England, who's a psychotherapist specializes in communications and relationships. Geoff, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the listeners
I've
have some
been,
idea.
okay, so I've been practicing as a psychotherapist for 35 years. Um, and my specialism currently is in, as you were saying just now, in relationships, particularly about communication, which is the foundation of a good relationship. So I was very excited to be invited onto the show to talk a little bit about this, and hopefully what I say might be helpful to people.
Okay, so let's get on with some of the questions. One of the questions I have is, what advice do you have for those on the spectrum who deal with anxieties while in a relationship?
Okay. I thought about this question quite a lot, and conclusion I came to is that relationships are always going to make a person feel vulnerable, because if you're in a relationship, you're effectively sharing yourself with another human being, and that human being is going to find out all about you. So, in a way, anxiety is inevitable. So, if we accept that anxiety rather than trying to fight against it or put up barriers to it, then the anxiety will actually diminish its power. It's only when we're trying to fight it we actually give that anxiety more power. So, that's, I mean, okay, so relationships are going to be anxiety provoking for all of us in our own ways. And if you're on the spectrum, I guess that becomes more pronounced. You can tell me that, Reed. I'm not an
Yes,
expert in the spectrum myself.
yes,
But
with those of us on the spectrum, anxiety is more pronounced
sure.
because the fears tend to build more,
Right.
and
Okay.
then
That's
we tend to overthink a lot of things a lot of
That's
times.
the thing, isn't it? So, yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's useful because if you, the overthinking often becomes an attempt to allay the anxiety. And so you end up playing a kind of game of chess with yourself. So if the other person does this, then I'll do that. And if they, you either plan a conversation or you rerun a conversation or the exchange that happened. That's all involves not accepting the anxiety or not accepting the reality of the situation that you're in. You do what you do in the relationship. You are the person that you are. The other person has a response to you, and none of that is controllable. If we accept that, it's much less hard work. Does that make some sense?
It does. I mean, because I know in experience when I've been in a relationship and we've broken up, I tend to overthink what did I do, and then it just like dwells in my head, and I just don't like let it go. Even in real life with job situations, if I get let go, I tend to overthink what did I do, what did I do, what did I do wrong, and
Yes,
it just sits there and dwells and dwells and just builds up and just builds this anxiety of
sure,
fear and dread.
sure, yeah, yeah, yeah. This assumes that you are in control of the situation, and that if you'd done a different thing to control the situation differently, a different outcome would have happened. On one level, that's quite an omnipotent position to take. Life is unpredictable. Human beings are unpredictable. The idea that we can control what goes on either in our working lives or in the relationship, is absurd, you know. We, of course, everybody does their best to make sure they do a good job or that they're as considerate as they can be within a relationship. Nobody's suggesting that we don't have to care about it, but there's a limit to that. You do your best, and that's good enough.
Okay. On to that, the next question I have for you is, how can those of us break our shyness barriers when we're in a relationship?
Okay.
Because I
This
know
is
a lot.
interesting.
Go on.
Please. No, you were going to say?
Because I know a lot of us on the spectrum are shy. They're like, we're introverted.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's hard to communicate when you're in that relationship. How do you break that barrier?
It's interesting. There seems to be a pressure from society that everybody should be outgoing and communicative. And that can be a pressure that we might apply to ourselves. The reality is that some people are more shy, more self-conscious than others. And as you say, particularly people on the spectrum. But that's nothing wrong with them. It's not, it's not a hanging offense. So you maybe find it difficult to express yourself, to put yourself forward. Part of this is about accepting yourself as the person that you are. And life, I find, is very paradoxical in this respect. If you can accept yourself for who you are, the shyness becomes less powerful in your life because you know that actually I'm all right, even if I say the wrong thing, or what I think of as might be the wrong thing. I'm not an awful person because of that. I'm still a human being. I'm still the same human being that I was. And if you accept yourself, then when you feel like joining in a conversation or when you're in a kind of relationship situation, if you want to share something with your partner, when you feel ready to do that, you do it in your own time. And maybe if that's a problem for your partner, maybe they're with the wrong person.
All right, that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
All right. Next question is, what is your advice on how those on the spectrum can be more social in the dating scene?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's been a long time since I've been on the dating scene, so I don't know whether I can comment too usefully about that. But obviously, what we're talking about is meeting someone for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, the mechanics of dating has changed completely since I dated anybody other than my present wife, who I've been married to for 35 years. So I knew her for 3 years before that. So it's been a while. But meeting someone for the first time is always going to be a challenging experience because you want them to like you want them to get on with you want them to appreciate you and accept you. So there's two avenues we can look at with that. One is it comes back to what I was talking about under the heading of the last question, is accepting yourself for the human being that you are. This is difficult. Most people in the world find this really hard, and a lot of people are constantly making a lot of effort to get themselves accepted in the real world by other people. Okay, and that applies to everyone, even extroverts. Some people who see themselves as extroverts, that you would call extroverts, a lot of it's an act. It's a
Mm-hmm.
shell, it's a persona they put on in order to become accepted. So when you're on the dating scene, my advice would be just to be the person that you are. If you try to be someone that you're not, people are going to spot that. And it's going to make you nervous. You're ending up putting on a performance. And like any performer will tell you, everybody gets performance nerves, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So again, accepting that actually when I meet someone for the first time, both of us are going to be a little bit anxious. So he or she I'm meeting is going to be wondering what I'm going to think of them, and I'm wondering what they're going to think of me. You know, it's one of those things. It's a paradox again. Of course, when you go on a date, it's really important to you. You want to meet someone who you hope you're going to make a relationship with. That's the idea of going on a date. But you also have to not allow it to matter too much. Okay, if this person doesn't like the person that I am, then maybe it wouldn't have been a very good relationship anyway.
Okay.
So,
All right. On to the next question is, how can you keep a relationship from falling apart?
okay, this is where communication becomes really, really important. So, however easy or difficult you find it, keep the dialogue going with your partner. Even if you go into the conversation and you have no idea how you're going to express what you want to express. If I can share something from my own experience, I know every relationship goes through difficult phases, and certainly mine did. And I needed to start a conversation with my wife that went something like, well, don't know how I can say this, but something's not right here, and I don't know, but I know I need to say something, you know, and I was that inarticulate. And it was the best conversation we ever had, because what communicated itself to her was that I cared about the relationship and I wasn't happy with the way it was, and that I was inviting her to explore it with me. Okay. If you do that, however well or easy you find it to express your feelings and emotions, nobody finds it that straightforward. As I say, I'm an experienced psychotherapist, but in my own relationship, I got as inarticulate as probably most people do. So, you know, don't worry about how it comes out. Start from where you are. This is what I'm feeling at the moment. I don't know how to express this to you, but I want to express something to you because, you know, equally it can be the opposite way around. It could be something really nice is happening in the relationship which you want to share to your partner, with your partner. So don't hold back on that either. Even if you feel like, oh, I'm really clumsy with feelings and I don't understand words and, whatever, the sentiment will get itself across.
Okay.
And whoever it is on the other end will appreciate the fact that you've bothered. And so that's the expressive side of it. The other side is listening. Listening is something most of us aren't trained to do. Women do it better than men on the whole, but, even some women find this difficult. When my partner comes to me and says she's not happy, or it could be a he, it doesn't matter, could come to me and say, I'm not happy with this that's going on in the relationship. There are several tendencies we might have. One of them would be to feel attacked or criticized. The other one would be to feel like I've done something wrong. And then the third is something needs fixing and I've got to come up with a solution. None of those are helpful. It may sound like a contradictory thing to say, but when your partner is communicating something in the relationship to you, even if it sounds negative, don't take it personally.
That's a
If
big
my
thing I
partner,
understand.
yeah, it sounds crazy, but it makes sense. It's a personal relationship, but don't take it personally. When your partner makes a statement in the relationship about something they're not happy with, that is a statement about them. not necessarily a statement about you. What I could say from my experience in relationships is that things that are a problem in relationships are very rarely caused by the partners in the relationship themselves. What happens is that the issues or the difficulties are triggered in the relationship by what happens. But the issues already existed. The strong emotional response that we have to our partners already exists, and it probably comes from somewhere back in our past. Okay. So if you know that, then you don't have to feel so over responsible for what your partner feels about you in the relationship. We have to be accountable in our relationships for how we behave. And if our partner has a problem with how we're behaving, then, there might be something that they might need us to change or to think about changing or to be aware of and understanding of. But that's not the same thing as all the guilt and kind of agony that goes on in relationships where we feel like we failed or we're a terrible person or we don't know how to do relationship because our partner has raised an issue. So make the space for that. If you can do both of those things, that's to say expressing what you truly feel without being too worried about the words that you use, and to also be there and listen and try and understand what your partner is saying to you, rather than getting caught up in your own guilt and bad feeling about yourself, then that will help keep the relationship from falling apart.
Very interesting at all. I mean, I've been a very big proponent of communicating within a relationship, expressing yourself to whoever you're with, because if you don't tell the other person how you're feeling or what's going on, or
Yeah.
if you sense the relationship is falling apart, and if none of you say anything, it's just going to happen. But if
Yes.
someone steps forward and expresses it, the
Yes.
two of you can come together and fix it.
That's right. Yes. Yes. But it needs the other person to listen, or to be willing to listen,
Mm-hmm.
and not to get too defensive. What I find in my couple work, particularly when the couple comes to me at first, is one person will say something that's bothering them and the other immediately comes in, well, I didn't do that often, or I haven't done it lately, or if I did, there was a reason for me doing it.
The
By
defensive
the time you've
mechanism.
done that, you've stopped listening to the person who has the issue. You're more concerned with your own ego than you are with your partner's happiness or the success or failure of the relationship. This is why a lot of relationships fall apart, because
Because
we're
of
wedded
non-communication.
to our own egos. Sorry.
Because of non-communication.
Well, it's the non-communication, but the non-communication happens because we're more interested in our own ego or self-image than we are
Mm-hmm.
in what our partner has to say, which could be to the benefit of the relationship.
Yeah, I get that. A lot of people, when someone becomes accusatory in a relationship,
Yeah,
the other person becomes defensive.
that's right. Thanks for bringing that in, because it allows me to also mention that your partner will not necessarily communicate their concerns in a way that's kind of user-friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of us, maybe in management or whatever, if you at work, you do go courses to how to give feedback, how to give positive feedback, and maybe people do at work. But in relationships, people don't do that. People just let it all go, and you might have to do, and obviously that's difficult. One of the things that you can do that makes life easier is what I call making I statements rather than you statements. So if you say, I feel lonely in this relationship, or I feel abandoned when you don't talk to me for days or whatever. That's a statement about me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel. Doesn't mean to say you've done anything wrong, but this is what I feel. Okay. If the norm is to, yes, as you say, get accusatory, so you say, you never, you always, you do this, you do that, that's going to put the other person on the defensive immediately. But you have to, one of the other things that keeps relationships together is having a little bit of tolerance for each other's humanity.
Yeah.
We're not going to get things right for each other all the time. So we, in the heat of the moment when things are happening, we lose our temper with each other. We get grouchy,
Yeah, I've always
And
said there is not one couple where both have the same likes. It's always going to be a little bit of oil and vinegar.
this is true. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's a question of how you deal with that, isn't it? But when you get in those moments where things do get a bit stressful, I was telling you before, we just moved into a new house. And we've been through a lot of stuff, just about that, and lost our temper with each other.
Mm.
But the question is, what do you do about it afterwards? So you apologize. The apology costs nothing. You were getting grouchy because you were stressed about whether the money would come through from the sale of the house to pay for the new house or whatever it might be. And, whether the removal men were going to break the furniture or, all that sort of stuff. So it's very easy once you've calmed yourself down to just say, look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of that, what I said to you. And it's over, it's forgotten.
Mm.
So apologies are useful in
Yeah.
relationships not falling apart.
Now,
Moving
moving up,
on.
moving on to the next question. I mean, do you have any tips or tricks with communicating within a relationship to help those out, how to communicate better?
Sure. I've kind of answered a lot of that just now, but staying open to different perspectives is quite important. Not letting, as you said earlier, not letting things build up so they become enormous issues, dealing with things as they go along.
Mm-hmm.
Having some humor, being able to not take yourself too seriously,
Yeah.
that's a useful thing. Having other things outside the relationship, which don't, so means the relationship isn't so pressurized, so that you get fulfillments not just from within the relationship, but outside the relationship. Those are all useful things. But as I say, most of the tips I've given already
Okay.
outside the relationship.
All right, moving on. I mean, how can those of us on the spectrum get ourselves out there to enter the dating scene? Because I
Mm,
know, coming from my point of view, a
go
lot
on.
of people have come to me and say, "Have you tried a dating site? Or have you done this? Or have you done that?" And it's scary
Yes,
because unless you have enough self-esteem, you're good looking, and you're not afraid to put yourself out there. There are those of us who are just so scared of socialization and afraid of rejection. It's frightening.
sure. Okay. That is challenging. It's very challenging. Um, so I don't think there are any magic formulas I can give you here that would make it considerably less challenging. I think some of the things I've already said, this is going to sound like a lot of repetition, but maybe good ideas are worth saying more than once. So um, if you're finding this challenging so that it paralyzes you, which I think a lot of people do, that's partly because you have the idea that other people don't find it challenging. So you're kind of thinking about it as there's something not normal about me because I'm so concerned about this. Maybe, I don't know. It's all the individual, but so letting go of that idea, because anyone who says they don't find it challenging doing that is putting on some kind of a front, I would say, you know, and just maybe being aware of that as a reality is useful. Having said that, probably, I suppose there's an equivalent of not taking it too personally. You know, with dating sites, I guess there is an element of sort of, I don't know, casting your net quite broadly in terms of, you know, who you decide to contact, who you like the look of, and so on and so forth. So in a way, that could take the pressure off you, like saying, well, you know, let's take this very slowly, you know, and meet up with this person. What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, we maybe don't hit it off. Fair enough. There's a lot of other people on the dating site that I can go and see. And, you know, if you talk to people, I don't know whether that might be a useful thing to do, talk to other people who do use the dating sites and say, well, you know, how many roughly people do you meet before you meet someone that you click with? I don't know what that figure might be, because it's been a long time. But I don't think there were dating sites when I was last dating. I met my wife in about 1983. I think the internet was fairly primitive then. So, you know, you know, I do have clients who will use the dating sites, and the impression I get is that you've got to see quite a large number of people before you click with them or they click with you, or there's that mutual spark. So I think you know, you have to not have very high expectations when you go into it. It might be good, or you know, or it might just be so-so. But you know, what are you going to do? You're going to meet up for a coffee, maybe go for a walk, meet up for a drink or something like that, and maybe you'll just have a nice time meeting a new person and enjoy that. Enjoy it for that. If it happens to work, okay. But you know, talk to other people maybe who are in the same position, because you'll find there's a lot of common ground. You know, and then you can at least compare notes and say, well, you know, this is what I did, and this worked for me. You know, I think that's probably as much as I can say on that.
All right, moving on. What is your advice on keeping a relationship strong?
Keeping a relationship strong. Okay. Other than what I've said already in terms of the communication, what I said, I've already mentioned having interests outside the relationship as well, not being, sorry, not being too dependent on the relationship for all your satisfaction. I think the other thing maybe is letting go of the idea that a lot of people have that relationships are about making the other person happy. There's a lot of mythology about relationships, and that's one of them, you know, that, you know, if you meet the man or woman of your dreams, that's going to make you happy. No, it won't, unless you were happy to start with. You're responsible for your own happiness. And if you're not happy with your partner, as we were saying earlier, you need to communicate that, okay? The other myth about relationships, which I maybe haven't mentioned, is that there is one right person out there for each of us, you know, or, you know, so there's a limited field. This is just not true. There's any number of people that you could get together with and make the relationship work. You know, that may sound a little bit indiscriminate, but really, you know, what constitutes you know, this kind of spark that people talk about is not as kind of, I mean, there's a romanticism, I don't get me wrong, I'm quite a romantic in many ways, but, you know, it isn't a matter of meeting Mr. or Miss or Ms. Right, you know. You can meet a person, often when you meet a person, maybe you don't like each other that much, but somehow or other you meet them again or whatever, it depends on the context in which you meet them. Somehow or other something happens, something magical happens, and you find yourself liking that person. Where I'm talking a lot about my own relationship, but why not? It's what I know best. When I first met my wife, I had a big argument with her. It was in a kind of conference, and we ended up disagreeing quite, you know, kind of vehemently with each other. It brought us together. I thought, I really like this woman because she can stand up to me, you know, she can give me a good fight. I appreciated that. So I don't know, I've deviated from the topic a bit. We were talking about keeping a relationship strong, I think, you know. So, you know, I think, but that's perhaps where that's relevant, is that maybe you don't have to expect it to go smoothly all the time. In fact, it won't. I have some very good colleagues who wrote a book. It was called Love, Sex and the Dangers of Intimacy. And if you want read, I can give you the details of that afterwards if people are interested in looking that up.
Yeah, I'll share that with my audience. I'll put that in the show.
Okay, you can Google it. It comes up. It's published. It's on Amazon. But what their theory is that all relationships go through a honeymoon period, and which I guess is fairly common knowledge. But you know, what you do is what you do after that honeymoon period is over, and you suddenly wake up and you think, well, who the hell is this who I've found in my relationship? You know, what do we do about that? This is where the communications has to start. And so you start to communicate with each other, and you have to let go of lots of ideas. When we first meet someone, we often project a kind of ideal on them, you know, in that honeymoon period. We think, this is the person who really gets me, who's really going to understand me, who really is going to be the love of my life. And nobody can sustain that for a lifetime. And, you know, I certainly think that relationships can last a lifetime. Mine certainly has. But, you know, it's up to you. I'm not doing any judgments about that, but it's my experience. But, you know, somehow letting go of that idea that this person is the one who's going to make me feel understood, accepted, a real man or real woman or whatever, is really vital. If you're still living in an idea that if I meet the right person, they will make me feel good, and then I won't have to worry anymore, that's not going to work. It never has worked, and it never will.
Yeah, I know that with my friend. He thinks his boyfriend is it, but he keeps getting this fear in his mind of, oh, he's gonna leave me for someone better, and I keep saying, no, he's not. He's told me that you two are good for each other.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. Well, we do become dependent on our partner when we feel that they're the only one who can meet our need for self-esteem. I mean, you were talking about self-esteem earlier. Our partner cannot make us feel good about ourselves. Sure, partners can be sympathetic, and if you've had a really bad time at work or something, and you can offload it, and that's really nice. But if you really don't feel good about yourself, however much love your partner pours into you, you still won't end up feeling good about yourself. And this kind of concept, I mean, know this couple that you're talking about, but it sounds to me like the person who's worried about the other guy leaving him is deeply insecure.
Yeah.
And if you're not looking at that in yourself and thinking to yourself, well, what makes me so insecure? And I would, of course, as a psychotherapist, say, well, you need to go and get some personal therapy to work out why you're so insecure. That might not be everybody's route. There are other routes available, but but it's your problem. And you can't expect your relationship is going to give you that security that you don't feel inside you.
All right, moving on. How do you manage long distance relationships so they work
Yeah,
for your benefit?
yeah, that's interesting. Long distance relationships, they are tricky. Mm. I mean, are you talking about the kind of relationship where somebody, for, I don't know, reasons of work or nationality, is living in one country and someone's living in another, for example, and they meet occasionally? Would that be the sort of thing you mean?
Sort of like that, because my friend, I mean, he lives in one city and his boyfriend lives like 3 hours away, so it's kind of like a long distance thing, and he only sees him maybe every few months.
Sure. That is difficult. I don't know a technique particularly for managing that. I guess at some level, you might need to think about, well, why are we doing this? I mean, if it's absolutely essential for work, that's that's a tricky thing. But usually, it might be possible for either one or both of you to move so that you can be a little bit closer. It depends what the couple wants in their relationship. Because I'm wondering, sometimes that can be an avoidance of intimacy. If you have a relationship like that, one possibility, going back to what I was saying about this honeymoon phase, that you never have to let go of that, because if you don't see each other very often, then every time becomes a new first time, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to deal with the tensions and the difficulties of living in close proximity to another person. Now, again, it's a free world. People can decide for themselves what they do. It's not up to me to tell people how they should live. But if I was working with a couple with that situation, I would certainly raise that as a possibility. Is this what we're really talking about? Because if you live in close proximity to each other, what would that mean to you? Because I just the way I think about it, if the feeling is there and you really want to be together, then you find a way of making it work in terms of careers and jobs and all of that. But, I don't know, that might not be everybody's way of thinking about it, but I guess I would want to talk about that with a couple who was experiencing that. I mean, there are times clearly, on a temporary basis where someone has to take a job somewhere else, and how do you manage that? Obviously, then there are the issues about distance and how you make contact. And obviously, since this COVID business, everyone is getting used to the sort of Zoom thing, and you can stay in touch that way. But then you have to deal with the sort of, as it were, re-entry when you each meet again. And it's almost like, are we then strangers? And how do we renegotiate the relationship? What's gone on for me during that period of absence? And how do we reorientate each other or ourselves towards each other, after that distance. And, I think that needs quite a lot of careful consideration. because it's putting another strain on the relationship, isn't it? But sometimes, as I say, that's inevitable. I was just thinking of, like, if you're in the army or whatever, you get posted abroad and you don't necessarily, take your wife and family with you, or your partner or whatever. And so, it's beyond your control. So you can, and that people do report difficulties of, well, when they do get together, being aware that it isn't going to be just straightforward, oh, right, we kind of come back together and we're really over the moon to see each other again. You might be tiptoeing around each other because you only see each other so rarely. Dealing with relationship communication and difficulty becomes even more problematic, because you maybe think, well, we've got 2 weeks together, and then we're not going to see each other for another 3 months. Maybe nobody wants to rock the boat, and that can be really difficult, I imagine. It's not an easy one, that. So best avoid it if you can, I would say.
All right, moving on. How
Sure.
do you communicate your needs to your partner if he or she does not understand what you're trying to convey to them?
Yeah, that's difficult, isn't it? Okay.
Especially with those of us, not me in particular, but those on the spectrum. I'm pretty sure you've talked with a lot of your
Sure.
clients who don't know how to communicate, who don't know how to read facial expressions well.
No. Okay. So the only thing I found that is useful in this particular situation is that you do have to perhaps work a little bit harder to both be clear with your partner that you find it difficult to explain your thoughts and feelings, so that you actually are acknowledging your need for their patience. So you say to them, well, actually, this is what I need from you at this point in time. And also that it's not the fact that they might find it difficult to understand you is not something they're doing wrong. So there is a reality, I think you have to be open about this. If that's your life situation, you are on the spectrum, you have to accept that reality, and that whoever you have a relationship needs to accept that reality as well. So it isn't going to be the same as with someone who is more conventionally wired, as it were, that they, so those non-verbal cues are going to be missed. So you need your partner to explain very specifically what they mean. The thing is, when I was thinking about this, coming on this podcast, one of the things I remembered was that actually what we're talking about with the spectrum is something which probably a large percentage of the male population on the planet would be diagnosed with at some end of it, not maybe very far on. I don't know how far along the spectrum are. So, the context in which I mainly deal with this, is with relationships, and particularly heterosexual relationships, where women are totally tuned in to nonverbal and nuanced communication, and men really, on the whole, aren't. So that, the common thing I hear from a lot of men, particularly if their wife suddenly comes in and says, look, I want a divorce. And the guy will say, what did I do? What was wrong? I don't understand. Explain it to me. And there is a kind of reality to that. It's sad, but there is a reality to that. So coming back to it, so it's not so unusual. That's what I want to say. But, in this situation, to try and explain it to your partner, I do need you to explain to me, what is it you mean? You say that you're not happy with what I'm doing. Tell me specifically, what is it that I'm doing that makes you unhappy? Because I'm not going to be able to do the guesswork, and so be clear about it. And it's not personal. It's not that I'm not committed to you and to being an active partner in this relationship. It's just how I'm wired, and that's how it works.
And that kind of goes into the next question, which is how do you talk with someone who doesn't understand what you're going through? Like, how do you let your partner know you have a hard time with things like noise and bright lights without hurting their
Sure,
feelings?
sure, yeah, yeah. I think that's right. I think there's no ducking it. I think you have to be just very specific. So at the end of the day, if we're going to have this relationship together, these are the things you have to know about me.
Yeah.
Bright lights really are a problem for me. I don't know. If everything else in the relationship has a relatively firm foundation, that doesn't have to be a big issue. And it's not necessarily going to hurt your partner's feelings. As long as you're clear, it's an I statement. So this is what life is like for me. And I feel that way whether I'm with you or whether I'm at work or whether I'm with my friends. I have that same experience. So I'm not blaming you for my experience. And
Okay.
just be specific.
All right, moving on. Is it better to be subtle or straightforward when you're trying to get your point across to your partner?
Um, ooh. I think probably in the way that you mean the question, I think straightforward is probably better. Again, with the emphasis on expressing how you experience things
Okay.
rather than, and I think, yeah, and certainly one of the things that happens is we're trying to put a point across to a partner, and often in relationships, the way we do it is that we put a lot of pressure on our partner to understand us. And
So true.
then that's going to put the barriers up for the other person. The thing that I often say to couples is that understanding your partner is not the same as agreeing with them.
Oh.
There's a difference. Because as you said earlier on, you expressed it in terms of the oil and the vinegar. Um, we feel differently about things, and we have different preferences for things, and there are decisions that we have to make as a couple about different things, and those decisions can end up being quite loaded, and it's often, you know, putting my point across becomes an equivalent to feeling accepted in myself. The totality of my being goes into that point that I'm trying to make to the partner, which could be something kind of crazily mundane, like what color we paint the walls, or
Yeah.
whatever, or where we go on holiday, or what food we're going to eat tonight, or any, number of issues that kind of almost end up in the divorce courts, which are so trivial like that, you know. And so when you're putting your point across, be aware of what is it I want. Mostly what we want is to be accepted and understood. We don't need our partner to agree with us.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That does make very much sense. I
Okay.
mean, moving on to a different question. How
Sure.
do you know you're in a very stable relationship?
Mhm.
I mean, how do you
It's
know
an
it's not
interesting,
shaky? How do you know it's stable enough that you and your partner are comfortable with each other, that nothing's going to fall apart on you?
sure. How I would judge that is if I am able to be myself to the extent that I am,
Mm-hmm.
whatever else is inhibiting me. So I don't feel I have to put on an act with my partner. Then I know it has a stability. Um, Looking at the relationship itself, it has the capacity to withstand quite a measure of argument or disagreement. That tells me that the relationship is stable. When we can state our perspectives without taking it personally, that's a stable relationship. It isn't, I think a lot of people get confused, there can be relationships which have a kind of stability. Like I'm thinking of my parents' relationship, where they basically pursued what I call parallel lives. My dad had his interests, my mum had her interests.
It
I
sounds like
guess
my
they must
parents.
have got along somehow, but there wasn't
It
a
sounds
lot
like
that was.
it sounds like my parents. My mom has her interests. My father had his interests. My mom
Yeah,
would be in her bedroom reading. My father would be in the basement on the computer.
that's right. Yeah. I mean, it's not wrong to have different interests. As we were saying, you need things outside the relationship which also give you fulfillment, and not everybody's interested in the same things. But you have to have some coming together, some intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't mentioned the dreaded sex word, but I'm going to, because that's important, one way
Yeah.
or another, you know,
And
because that's if you like, a barometer of what's happening in the relationship.
yeah,
How
I
is the
mean,
sex?
yeah,
I
how
know
is
you've
the
got
sex?
someone else coming on to talk about that, but
I just had her yesterday.
Oh, right. So, yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
yeah, sex, I mean, you can't base a relationship on sex. I mean,
No, you can't, but but it can be a barometer
yeah.
of what's going on. And often I find that a lot of the metaphors that are going on in the couple relationship, when I'm talking about different needs and different wants, can be quite sexual I guess, how graphic to be, but a lot of men are often talking about feeling accepted in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship and feeling good enough. And really, what's a good barometer of that is how accepted they feel sexually.
Mm.
Are their advances accepted, as it were? Anyway, we could talk more about that, but anyway,
Yeah. Anyways, moving
moving
on.
on.
This is a very important question. How
Go
do you
on.
deal with jealousy with your partner?
Jealousy. Okay.
The big green monster.
Yeah, I say, I'm hesitating there because there's two different levels of jealousy. Okay. One is the sort of neurotic level of jealousy where that simply is a matter of insecurity.
Mm.
If I don't feel confident of myself as an acceptably okay, attractive guy or whatever gender I identify with, then whatever attention my partner might pay to another person, I'm going to see as something suspicious, something that destabilizes me.
Mm.
um, you know, uh, Having said that, if there's, I mean, obviously, these days. This is quite relationships are more negotiable. So if we agree somewhere along the line in the relationship that it's okay to flirt with other people, or maybe even to have sex with other people. That's what we've agreed, and I'm assuming that that means that if my partner goes off and does that, I'm not going to feel jealous. I'm not sure how that works myself. I haven't ever been in a relationship like that, so
Right.
I'm a bit old-fashioned in that respect. But there are plenty of people who do, and as I say, there's room for all sorts of possibilities in life. But obviously, if those kind of things aren't negotiated and someone does go off and have an affair with somebody, then jealousy is pretty inevitable. So it depends, whether there's cause for it objectively. And that can become quite a contention. I was thinking about someone I was working with recently who has such an obsession with whether his partner is interested in somebody else, that they end up, doing things like taking lie detector tests and what have you. If it gets to that extent, you just think, this is your issue, mate. You're insecure, and maybe you need to look at that. And yeah, that's what I think.
All right. Moving on to the last two questions. How do
Okay.
you ask your partner if they're happy in their relationship without hurting them?
I guess for me, that would be a question of why you're asking the partner whether they're happy or not. If I genuinely want to know, I don't know that that's going to be terribly hurtful. Or I might, I guess, have noticed that my partner might seem a little bit down, or a bit upset about things, and I might ask her, are you happy with our relationship? What's going on? That's not going to hurt her. If I'm doing it because I'm feeling like worried that she's not happy, if I need her to be happy, then that can become a pressure, on her to be happy, or depending on what the gender of the partner is. So you don't. That would make somebody hurt. I guess, I don't know. Could be hurt, or they could be annoyed or just upset by that. So for me, it depends on why you want to know.
All right. And the very last question is, how 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 do you what signs are there for your how to know hey
Okay,
how
sorry.
to know the signs that your partner isn't happy?
And that's a tricky one, especially given that on the spectrum it's difficult to read those cues.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess for me, there is something about accepting the reality of that and being clear with your partner. So you say to him or her, well, look, I'm not really good at reading these cues. So you tell me if you're not happy.
All right.
Another thing occurs to me as I'm saying that, maybe it applies to the last question. If some of these ideas that we've been talking about this evening, if we're able to put them into practice, then actually we could say that, each partner is responsible for their own happiness. So if my partner is not telling me that they're unhappy, I assume that they are happy. And, I don't think I am quite uncomfortable when I think about it. I gave off the top of my head answer to that last question, but I'm uncomfortable with the idea of second guessing my partner. Obviously, if I notice overtly that she's crying a lot or whatever, I would obviously think most people would construe that as a sense of something's upset her. But, I don't think it's my job to second guess my partner, and not her job to second guess me. If I feel unhappy or not kind of fulfilled or whatever it is in the relationship, then it's my job for my own well-being to raise that as an issue with my partner. And a good relationship should be able to accommodate that.
All right. Well, anyways, Geoff, why don't you let people know how they can reach you online?
Online,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Well, my website is www.geoff, that's Geoff with a G, Geoff, hyphen Lamb, hyphen psychotherapist.com. You can get me on there.
Anyways, Geoff, thank you so much for coming on to the show and talking with me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Let's keep in touch.
We will. Okay. Thank you
Right.
very much for inviting me. It was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Same here. Very,
Thank you.
very informative.
Okay. Well, I think we've all learned something. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great night, Geoff.
I will. And you. Cheers.
Right. Cheers.
Bye.